The humiliation ambassador Elena Vasquez had dreamed of this moment her entire life, and now that it was finally here, she felt her heart beating so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The Grand Assembly Hall of Nithara Prime was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, with walls made of living crystal that shifted colors like a sunset trapped in glass, and a ceiling so high it seemed to vanish into clouds of purple mist. 12 species sat in their floating chairs, arranged in a massive circle, and Elena stood alone in the center like a performer on a stage, except this was no performance. This was the most important moment in human history. She had traveled 14 months through the cold darkness of space to reach this place, to stand before the conclave of ascended races and ask for something that should have been simple: the right for humanity to exist as equals among the stars. The Zorvathi High Arbiter looked down at her from his elevated seat, his insectoid body covered in ceremonial armor that gleamed like polished obsidian, his compound eyes reflecting her tiny figure 1,000 times over. "You may speak, creature of Earth," he said, and already Elena felt the sting of his words. The way he said creature instead of representative or ambassador, she cleared her throat and began the speech she had practiced 10,000 times. "Honored members of the conclave, I come before you on behalf of the people of Earth. 8 billion souls who have looked up at the stars for countless generations and wondered what lay beyond our small blue world." She spoke of human achievements, of the struggles her people had overcome, of the wars they had ended and the peace they had built, of their first tentative steps into the cosmos and their joy at discovering they were not alone when she finished. Silence filled the great hall, and for one beautiful moment Elena allowed herself to hope. Then the laughter began. It started with the Netheran delegate, a serpentine being whose scales shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, and the sound it made was like water bubbling through broken glass. Others joined in, clicks and whistles and strange gurgling noises that Elena's translator struggled to process. But she did not need translation to understand mockery. The Zorvathi High Arbiter raised one clawed hand and the laughter slowly died down, though Elena could still see amusement rippling through the assembly. "You speak well for an animal," the Arbiter said, and his voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who did not even recognize cruelty in his words. "Let us see what your people have accomplished." He waved his hand and suddenly the air around Elena filled with holographic images. Earth's military forces displayed for all to see. 342 ships, the largest barely a kilometer long, powered by fusion drives that the Zorvathi had abandoned as primitive 5,000 years ago, armed with particle weapons that would bounce harmlessly off conclave shields. The laughter returned, louder this time. "This is what you bring to the stars," the Netheran delegate hissed. "This is what you offer the conclave, these toys, these floating rocks with engines strapped to them." The Kethvori representative, a being that looked like a cloud of golden light with eyes, spoke in a voice like wind through chimes. "Perhaps we should not be so harsh, my colleagues. They are clearly doing their best with their limited cognitive abilities." More laughter, and Elena felt her face burning with humiliation. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The Zorvathi Arbiter leaned forward, his massive head blocking out the light behind him, casting Elena in shadow. "Here is what will happen, little ambassador from the little world. You will return to Earth and tell your leaders that they have one solar cycle to accept Zorvathi governance. Your planet will become a protectorate of our empire. Your people will serve as laborers and curiosities, and you should be grateful for this mercy, because the alternative is correction." Alana's voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "And what does correction mean?" The Arbiter made a sound that her translator rendered as a chuckle. "It means your little blue world becomes a little gray rock." Ask the Meridani what correction means. If you can find any of them still alive. Elena wanted to scream, wanted to rage. wanted to do something other than stand there feeling small and helpless. But there was nothing she could do. She was just one woman representing a species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 30 years ago, standing before empires that had ruled the stars since before humans had invented writing. The journey home felt longer than the journey out. And when Elena finally stepped off her shuttle onto Earth soil, she felt like she had aged 100 years. The Secretary General met her at the landing site, and from the look on his face, Elena knew that her reports had already been received. "How bad is it?" he asked. "They gave us 1 year to surrender or they will kill us all," Elena said. And the words tasted like ash in her mouth. And they laughed while they said it. That night, Elena could not sleep, and she stood on the balcony of her temporary quarters, watching the stars that now seemed less like distant dreams and more like the eyes of predators. A knock at her door broke her thoughts, and she opened it to find a man in a military uniform she did not recognize, his face weathered and his eyes carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "my name is General Marcus Stone, and I need you to come with me immediately." "Where are we going?" "To learn the truth about what humanity really is," the general said. "To learn about Project Lazarus." 3 hours later, Elena stood in an elevator descending into the Swiss Alps. The numbers on the display climbing past depths she did not know existed. And when the doors finally opened, she stepped into a chamber that should not have been possible. Screens covered every wall, showing star maps that extended far beyond anything human astronomers had ever charted. And in the center of the room sat a single pedestal holding a data crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. "What is this place?" Elena whispered. General Stone stood beside her, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of secrets kept for generations. "This is where we remember what everyone else has forgotten. This is where we keep the truth about the war that almost ended everything. The war that humanity fought 12,000 years ago." Elena turned to him. Confusion and fear and something that might have been hope all fighting for control of her expression. "That is impossible. 12,000 years ago, humans were living in caves." The general shook his head slowly. "No, Ambassador, 12,000 years ago, we were living in the stars. We ruled an empire that made the conclave look like children playing with toys, and we sacrificed everything, to save this galaxy from a darkness that would have consumed it all." He touched the data crystal and the chamber filled with light. And Elena Vasquez finally learned the truth about humanity. They had not always been weak, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the solar system, their ancient fleet was waiting to prove it. The forgotten war, the light from the data crystal, painted the chamber in colors that Elena did not have names for, and she watched as images formed in the air around her. Images of ships and worlds and battles that should have been impossible. General Stone stood beside her, his voice quiet as he began to explain what she was seeing. 12,000 years ago, humanity was not a young species taking its first steps into the cosmos. We were the Terran Dominion, and we were one of the most powerful civilizations this galaxy had ever known. The holographic display shifted to show a star map, and Elena gasped as she saw the extent of it. Thousands of star systems marked in blue. Trade routes, military outposts, and colony worlds stretching across half the galaxy. We had been in space for over 50,000 years by that point, Stone continued. We had developed technologies that the current conclave cannot even imagine. Our ships could cross the galaxy in days. Our weapons could crack planets. Our medical science had pushed human lifespans to nearly 1,000 years. Elena shook her head, struggling to accept what she was hearing. But there is no evidence of this anywhere. No ruins, no artifacts, nothing in our history or archaeology, because we erased it, Stone said. And his voice carried a sorrow that made Elena's chest ache. We erased all of it on purpose, and I will explain why the display changed again. And now Elena saw something that made her blood run cold. It came from the space between galaxies. A darkness that moved with purpose, a void that consumed everything it touched. And the images showed it sweeping across star systems like a wave of absolute nothing, leaving only emptiness in its wake. We called it the Hollow, Stone said. We do not know where it came from or what it truly was. Some kind of entity from another dimension. A living absence that fed on matter and energy and thought. It arrived at the edge of our galaxy, and it began to eat. The holographic battles that followed were unlike anything Elena had ever imagined. Human warships the size of moons firing weapons that tore holes in reality itself. Entire fleets sacrificing themselves to hold back the advancing darkness for just a few more hours. The war lasted 300 years, Stone said. 300 years of constant fighting, of watching entire civilizations disappear into the hollow, of sacrificing billions of lives just to slow it down. Elena watched as world after world fell, as the blue territory on the star map shrank and shrank, as humanity and its allies were pushed back to the edge of extinction. How did you stop it? She asked. Her voice, barely a whisper. Stone touched the crystal again, and the display showed something new. A massive structure floating in the void between galaxies. A ring of impossible size covered in symbols and mechanisms that hurt Elena's eyes to look at. We built the seal, Stone said. It took everything we had, every resource, every scientist, every ship. We poured 100 years of effort into creating a device that could trap the hollow and hold it. Outside our reality, the images showed the final battle. Millions of ships forming a barrier while the seal was activated. The hollow being drawn toward the structure like water down a drain. And then a flash of light so bright that the recording went white. It worked, Stone said. The hollow was contained, locked away behind the seal. But the cost was beyond measure. 90% of our population was dead. Our empire was in ruins. And the survivors were broken in ways that went beyond the physical. Elena turned to face him directly. That still does not explain why you hid everything. Why you made humanity forget. Stone's expression grew even more somber. Because of what the war did to us. 300 years of fighting had turned us into something terrible. We had become so focused on survival that we lost our compassion, our mercy, our basic humanity. We had done things to win that war, things that I cannot speak of, things that made us no better than the darkness we fought. He walked to a different console and brought up images of human soldiers, their eyes empty and cold, their bodies modified with weapons and armor that made them look more machine than flesh. The survivors gathered and made a choice. They decided that the only way to save humanity's soul was to start over, to wipe our memories and return to our homeworld and begin again as something new, something gentler. So you just forgot everything, Elena said. Not everyone. A small group was chosen to remember, to guard the sleeping fleet and the seal and the truth. We call ourselves the Watchers. And we have passed this duty down through 400 generations, waiting for the day when humanity would need to remember. Elena's mind was racing with questions. But one pushed its way to the front, the Conclave, the species that just threatened to destroy us. Where were they during all of this? Stone made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. The Zorvathi were barely using stone tools when we patrolled their skies. The Netherans were primitive creatures living in swamps. The Kethvari had not even evolved yet. Everything they have, everything they are. They built on the ruins of our empire without ever knowing what came before. They brought up new images, showing the slow rise of new civilizations from the ashes of the old. Species discovering ancient human technology and claiming it as their own. Building their empires on foundations they did not understand. They think they are the ancient ones, Stone said. They think humanity is young and primitive because that is what we wanted them to believe. We seeded false histories, destroyed evidence of our existence, made ourselves invisible so we could heal in peace. Elena felt something changing inside her. The humiliation of the conclave chamber being replaced by something else. Something that felt like fire building in her chest. And now they threaten us, she said. They threaten to destroy the people who saved this entire galaxy. Yes, Stone said. And that is why it is time to wake up. He led her to another elevator, and this one took them up instead of down. Up through miles of rock until they emerged into a facility hidden in the frozen wastes of the Kuiper Belt. And Elena found herself looking through a massive window into the void of space. What she saw there took her breath away. Ships. Thousands of them, floating in the darkness like sleeping giants. Their hulls black as night and covered in ice and dust. But even dormant, they radiated a presence that made the Conclave's mightiest warships seem like toys. The Sleeper Fleet, Stone said. 12,000 ships that we kept hidden and maintained, waiting for the day when humanity would need them again. Elena stared at the vessels, at their impossible size and their alien beauty, and she felt tears forming in her eyes. Can we wake them? Stone nodded slowly. We can, and when we do, the Conclave will learn what the rest of the galaxy learned 12,000 years ago. What is that? Elena asked. Stone's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something other than sorrow in them. Something fierce and proud. They will learn that humanity does not bow. Humanity does not beg, and when humanity fights, galaxies tremble. Elena turned back to the window and looked at the sleeping fleet. At the inheritance that her ancestors had left for this very moment, the Zorvathi had given them 1 year to surrender. They would not need anywhere near that long. The awakening the Zorvathi did not believe in patience, and they certainly did not believe in giving inferior species time to prepare for the inevitable. High Commander Zethrak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, watching the stars streak past as his armada of 3,000 warships raced toward the tiny blue world called Earth. His orders had been clear. Do not wait for the deadline. Strike now while the humans are still confused and afraid. Crush them quickly and present their surrender to the Conclave as proof of Zorvathi superiority. It would be easy, almost boring. 3,000 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy against a few hundred primitive human vessels that could barely scratch Zorvathi armors. Rak clicked his mandibles in anticipation, already imagining the medals he would receive, the praise from the High Arbiter, the fear in the eyes of other Conclave species when they saw what the Zorvathi could do. Commander, his censor officer called out. We are entering the outer boundary of the human star system. Excellent. Continue forward and prepare all weapons. I want this finished before the next meal cycle. The fleet moved past the orbit of a distant ice world that the humans called Neptune, and Zethrak allowed himself a moment of satisfaction at how smoothly everything was proceeding. Then, his censor officer made a sound that Zethrak had never heard before. A high-pitched whine of pure terror. Commander, there is something out here. What do you mean, something? Explain yourself. I cannot. The readings make no sense. There are energy signatures appearing all around us. Thousands of them. But they are coming from empty space. Zethrak was about to demand a clearer answer when the first ship became visible. It emerged from the darkness like a predator rising from deep water. Ice and dust falling away from a hull that seemed to absorb light itself. Running lights igniting in patterns that hurt Zorvathi eyes to look at the ship was massive. So massive that Zethrak's flagship could have fit inside its smallest hangar bay. And it was not alone. More ships appeared, hundreds of them, then thousands, rising from their ancient slumber like gods waking from dreams. Their reactors flaring to life with energy outputs that made Zorvathi power cores look like candles. Commander, the censor officer was openly weeping now. I am reading 12,000 vessels. The smallest is twice the size of our flagship. And their weapons, I have never seen readings like this. Our database has no record of this technology. Zethrak wanted to give orders, wanted to take control of the situation. But his voice had frozen in his throat as he watched the impossible fleet arrange itself between his armada and Earth. Then a transmission came through on all frequencies, and a voice spoke in a language that was not human, not exactly. Something older and harder that made every translator in the fleet struggle to keep up. This is Terran Dominion vessel Prometheus Unbound, flagship of the Sleeper Fleet. We have slept long enough. Earth stands under our protection. Withdraw now, and we will allow you to leave with your lives. Continue forward, and you will be unmade. Zethrak finally found his voice, though it came out weaker than he wanted. This is High Commander Zethrak of the Zorvathi Empire. You will stand down and surrender your vessels immediately. You are interfering with official conclave business. There was a pause, and when the voice returned, it carried something that might have been amusement. You do not know who we are. Do you? You do not know what you threaten. Let me show you. The view screen flickered, and suddenly Zethrak was seeing star maps, ancient recordings of battles. Images of Zorvathi ancestors cowering in caves while massive human ships patrolled their skies. We were old when your species was young, the voice said. We protected your world when you could not protect yourselves. We fought wars against darkness that would have consumed this entire galaxy. And now you come to threaten our homeworld. Zethrak felt something he had never felt before. Not in battle, not in any situation. He felt genuinely afraid, but he was still a Zorvathi commander. And Zorvathi did not retreat. All ships, attack formation. Target the largest vessel and fire at will. 3,000 Zorvathi warships opened fire simultaneously. Enough firepower to crack a planet. Enough energy to turn a small moon into slag. All of it concentrated on the Prometheus Unbound. The beams and missiles and plasma bolts crossed the distance in seconds. A storm of destruction that should have overwhelmed any defense. They splashed harmlessly against shields that glowed briefly gold and then faded back to invisibility. Interesting, the voice said. Our shields are 12,000 years out of maintenance, and your weapons still cannot penetrate them. Would you like to try again, or shall we respond? Zethrak did not get a chance to answer. Prometheus Unbound fired a single shot. A beam of pure white light that seemed to bend space around it. And the Zorvathi dreadnought hammer of justice simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, and the next there was only expanding gas and debris. Then the rest of the Sleeper Fleet opened fire. It was not a battle. Battles implied some measure of equality between the combatants. This was extermination. Zorvath shields that had never been breached collapsed after a single hit. Armor that had resisted the most powerful weapons in the Conclave arsenal melted like wax in a furnace. Ships that had taken years to build were destroyed in second. Rak watched in frozen horror as his fleet was systematically annihilated, as ships tried to flee and were cut down before they could engage their drives, as escape pods were vaporized before they could launch. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted 11 minutes when it was over. Only 3 Zorvathi ships remained, their weapons disabled, their engines crippled, drifting helplessly in a sea of debris that had once been the pride of the Empire. We are letting you live, the voice of the Prometheus Unbound said. Not out of mercy, but because someone needs to carry the message back to your masters. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them what happened when you threatened Earth. And tell them that if they ever point weapons at our homeworld again, we will not stop with one fleet. Zethrak could not speak, could not think, could only stare at the ancient ships that had just destroyed everything he believed about the galaxy. One more thing, the voice continued, and now it sounded almost gentle. Tell your conclave to look up the name Terran Dominion in their oldest archives. Tell them to find out who really built the foundations their empires stand upon. And tell them that we have returned, The transmission ended, and the sleeper fleet began to move. Not toward the fleeing Zavati ships, but deeper into the solar system, taking up positions around Earth like guardians returning to their post after a long absence on the bridge of his crippled flagship. High Commander Zethrak finally understood the magnitude of the mistake the Conclave had made. They had mocked humanity as weak. They had threatened to destroy them, and in doing so, they had awakened something that should have stayed asleep. The journey back to Conclave space would be long and humiliating. But Zethrak knew that the real horror was just beginning. Because if these ancient ships were real, if humans had truly once ruled the galaxy, then everything the Conclave believed about itself was a lie, and the species they had dismissed as primitive animals were about to remind the galaxy why their ancestors had once ruled the stars. The reckoning, the Grand Assembly Hall of Nethera Prime had never known silence like this. Every delegate sat frozen in their seats as the holographic recording played for the third time, showing the complete and total annihilation of the Zarvathi peacekeeping fleet in just 11 minutes. The High Arbiter's compound eyes had lost their arrogant gleam, replaced by something that looked very much like terror. "This must be a fabrication," the Netheran delegate hissed. Though her scales had gone pale with fear, the humans cannot possess such technology. It is simply not possible. 3,000 ships, the Kethvari representative whispered, its golden light flickering with distress. 3,000 of our finest warships destroyed as if they were nothing. And the humans lost nothing, not a single vessel. The Zorvathi High Arbiter finally spoke, his voice hollow and broken. "I have reviewed the sensor logs personally. They are authentic. The surviving ships brought back data that cannot be faked. And there is more." He waved his hand and new images appeared. Images pulled from the oldest archives of every Conclave species. References to beings called the First Wardens or the Ancient Protectors, or simply the ones who came before. We searched our most ancient records, as the human transmission suggested, the Arbiter said, and we found references, fragments of myths and legends, stories that we had dismissed as primitive superstition. The images showed cave paintings of massive ships in the sky, stone tablets describing beings who protected young species from dangers they could not understand, oral traditions speaking of a great war against darkness that nearly destroyed everything, the weapon signatures from the battle match energy patterns described in texts over 10,000 years old. The Arbiter continued. Texts that speak of the Terran Dominion, of humanity as the guardians of this galaxy, of their sacrifice to seal away something called the Hollow Chaos erupted in the chamber. Delegates shouting over each other, accusations flying, some demanding immediate surrender, while others insisted on mounting a unified military response. Through it all, one delegate remained calm, the ambassador from a minor species called the Ven, a small humanoid with 4 arms and eyes like polished copper. "May I speak?" she said quietly, and something in her voice made the chaos slowly die down. The High Arbiter gestured for her to continue. "My people have a longer memory than most," the Ven ambassador said. "We were among the few species old enough to have lived alongside the Terran Dominion, though we were too primitive then to understand what we witnessed." She rose from her seat and walked to the center of the chamber, the same spot where Elena Vasquez had stood and been mocked just weeks before. "The stories my grandmothers told me were not myths. They were history. The humans did protect us. They did fight a war against something terrible. And they did sacrifice their empire to save this galaxy. Then why did they hide?" the Netheran delegate demanded. "Why did they pretend to be primitive?" The Ven ambassador's expression grew sad. "Because the war broke them. My grandmother's grandmother spoke of human soldiers with eyes like dead stars, of weapons that destroyed entire systems, of choices so terrible that the humans could not live with what they had become." She turned to face the assembly directly, They chose to forget so they could heal. They chose to be reborn as something gentler. And we have spent the last 12,000 years building our empires on their ruins while mocking the very people who gave us the chance to exist. Silence fell again. Heavier this time. Weighted with shame and dawning understanding. Then the doors of the assembly hall opened, and Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked in. But she was not alone. Behind her came General Stone, and a figure that made every delegate freeze. A holographic projection of a human woman in ancient armor, her eyes glowing with soft blue light. Her presence radiating power that made even the crystal walls of the chamber seem to vibrate. "I am Athena," the projection said. "Tactical intelligence of the Terran Dominion. Consciousness age approximately 16,000 years. And I am here to deliver humanity's terms." The High Arbiter tried to speak, but no sound came out. "We do not want war," Athena continued. "We did not wake our fleet to conquer or destroy. We woke it because you left us no choice. And because there is something far more dangerous than conclave politics approaching this galaxy." She waved her hand and a new image appeared. A tear in space itself, held shut by machinery so ancient it had become fused with the fabric of reality. The seal is weakening. The hollow stirs, and when it breaks free it will not distinguish between human and Zoathi. Between Netheran and Kethvari, it will consume everything. Elena stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. Humanity is not here to demand submission. We are here to offer partnership, real partnership, as equals. Because when the Hollow returns, we will meet every ship and every soldier this galaxy can provide. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had laughed at her just weeks before. "You mocked us as weak. You threatened our world. And now you have seen what we really are. You have two choices. Continue to be our enemies and face the Hollow alone, or become our allies and face it together." The Zorvathi High Arbiter stood on legs that seemed unsteady. "How do we know this threat is real? How do we know you are not simply trying to frighten us into submission?" Athena smiled. And it was not a warm expression, "Because I will show you. I will transmit coordinates to your fastest scout ships. Send them there and see for yourselves what waits on the other side of the seal. Within hours." Conclave scouts reached the coordinates and transmitted their findings back to the assembly. The recording showed the seal, a ring structure so massive it defied comprehension, covered in Terran symbols that still glowed with power after 12 millennia on the other side. Visible through the weakening barrier, something moved. It was not solid, and it was not empty. It was an absence with intent, a hunger given form, and it pressed against the seal with the patience of something that had waited thousands of years and could wait thousands more. The scouts did not stay long. Their pilots were screaming by the time they jumped back to safety, and one of them had to be sedated because he would not stop clawing at his own eyes. The assembly watched the footage in horrified silence. "Now you understand," Elena said softly. "This is what our ancestors died to contain. This is what they sacrificed everything to seal away. And this is why we need to work together." The High Arbiter looked at her, and for the first time there was no arrogance in his expression. Only fear and something that might have been respect. "What do you need from us?" Elena smiled. And it was the smile of someone who had been mocked and dismissed and had emerged stronger for it. "We need you to help us save the galaxy." Again, the vote was held within the hour. For the first time in the Conclave's history, it was unanimous. The inheritance 6 months had passed since the vote, and the galaxy was changing faster than anyone had thought possible. Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Prometheus Unbound, watching through a window that spanned nearly a kilometer as ships from a dozen different species moved in formation around the ancient Terran flagship Zorvi dreadnoughts flew alongside human cruisers, their crews exchanging tactical data and training exercises. Netheran science vessels worked with Terran engineers to understand technology that had been lost for 12,000 years. And Kethvori healing ships stood ready to support any vessel that needed assistance. It was beautiful, Elena thought, and it was also terrifying, because she knew what they were preparing for Treaty of Soul had been signed 3 months ago. Not a surrender, but a true partnership, with humanity taking its rightful place as equals among the stars. And with every species committing resources to the coming war, there had been resistance, of course. Old hatreds did not disappear overnight. And there were still those in the Conclave who resented humanity's sudden rise from mockery to leadership, but every day brought new converts. As more and more beings visited the coordinates near the far and nigh the Mayo seal and saw for themselves what waited on the other side, fear was a powerful motivator. But Elena preferred to think that hope was stronger. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Athena's holographic form approaching. The ancient AI moving with a grace that belied her digital nature. "Ambassador," Athena said. "The latest production reports are in. The new shipyards are performing beyond projections." Elena nodded, thinking of the massive construction facilities that had sprung up across the galaxy, combining ancient Terran designs with modern conclave manufacturing, producing a new fleet that would dwarf anything that had come before. "How long until the seal fails?" she asked. "My projections suggest between 5 and 15 years, Athena replied. "The variance is large because we do not fully understand the Hollow's capabilities. It may be learning, adapting, finding weaknesses we did not anticipate." Elena looked back at the fleet outside the window. "Will we be ready?" Athena was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her voice was different, softer, more human. "May I share something with you, Ambassador? Something I have never shared with anyone from this era." Elena turned to face her fully. Of course. Athena's form flickered slightly. And suddenly Elena was seeing something else, a memory projection, showing a young woman in ancient Terran armor standing on a bridge very much like this one. "This was Lieutenant Sarah Chun," Athena said. "She was my primary operator during the last war. The human whose neural patterns formed the foundation of my consciousness." The memory showed Sarah laughing with crewmates, planning battles, crying over fallen friends, growing harder and colder as the years of war ground her down. By the end, she was not the woman I had known, Athena continued. None of them were. The war had taken everything good from them and left only the will to survive. The memory showed Sarah giving the order to destroy an entire star system to deny it to the Hollow, watching with empty eyes as billions of lives vanished in nuclear fire. "This is why we chose to forget," Athena said. "This is why the survivors decided to wipe their memories and start over. They had become monsters, and they could not live with what they had done." Elena felt tears on her cheeks. "Why are you showing me this?" Athena's projection returned to normal, and she met Elena's eyes with an expression that was almost motherly. "Because you need to understand what we are fighting for. Not just survival, not just victory, but the chance to do it differently this time." She gestured at the fleet outside the window. 12,000 years ago, we fought alone. We carried the burden of the entire galaxy on our shoulders, and it broke us. This time we have allies, true allies, who will share the weight. Elena wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "You think we can win without becoming what you became? I think we have to try," Athena said. "I think that is the whole point of everything that has happened. Your ancestors did not sacrifice their memories, just so their descendants could make the same mistakes." A tone sounded, and a communication request appeared. A joint briefing with military commanders from 17 different species, all preparing for a war that would determine the fate of everything. Elena took a deep breath and smiled. "Then let us make sure they would be proud." She walked toward the briefing room, but paused at the door and looked back at Athena. You said Sarah Chen's neural patterns formed your consciousness. Does that mean you remember being her? Remember being human? Athena was quiet for a long moment. I remember everything, she finally said. The joy and the pain and the love and the loss. I remember what it felt like to hope and what it felt like to despair. And I remember making the choice to seal away the hollow, even though it meant losing everything I cared about. Her holographic form seemed to shimmer with emotion. That is why I believe in you, Ambassador, because I remember being young and scared and facing something impossible. And I remember that we won anyway. Elena nodded slowly, feeling the weight of history and the promise of the future pressing against her shoulders. Thank you, Athena, for everything. She walked into the briefing room where generals and admirals and commanders from across the galaxy waited. Beings who had mocked humanity, now standing ready to fight beside them, through the window behind her. The stars burned cold and bright, and somewhere beyond them the hollow pressed against its ancient prison. Hungry and patient, it had waited 12,000 years. It could wait a little longer, but when it finally broke free, it would not find a galaxy divided and weakened, would find humanity and its allies standing together, armed with the knowledge of the past and the hope of the future, ready to finish what had been started so long ago, and this time, they would not fight alone in the void beyond the galaxy's edge. The hollow felt the ripples of awakening power, felt the gathering of forces against it, felt something it had not felt in 12 millennia, not fear exactly, because the hollow did not feel as lesser beings did, but something close, something like recognition. They, ones who had heard it before, were returning. And this time they had brought friends. The final war for the galaxy was coming, and humanity was ready to claim its inheritance.